Well, hello everyone. Welcome to my room. I hope you're doing well, guys. Today we're going to talk about a concept which I propose to call the concept of a hybrid INFJ. If you're curious about what this means and want to know a little bit more, well, just certainly stick to me and we'll try to explore that together. And I want to emphasize more than ever that we're going to explore that together because I'm also curious about your feedback on this idea and if it makes intuitive and rational sense to you. You might be aware, if you've been watching some of my content in the last couple of days and weeks, that I've slowly started, working on journaling down notes in a manuscript for my next book on the INFJ, and I'm also kind of using that, using my videos to test ideas through interactions with you, my audience, who are basically the one of the very much trusted sources of feedback. So it's a little bit like, if you've been in academia or if you've been in university, you will know that professors, researchers, they use conferences and talks and often their own classes to test their new ideas as well. So before I move on to this concept, okay, on the topic of INFJ, until the release of my new book, for now, like the reference work by myself on the INFJ type is the Ecstatic Soul, which is a book on the INFJ, only on the INFJ, but it hopefully goes quite deep. I will just change that a bit so that you can see me better. The Ecstatic Soul is available for less than $10. The link's below. So if you haven't got a copy of it, if you want to deepen your understanding, this is highly recommended reading, as well as my book, The Infinite Castle, although it's not a book on the INFJ, but rumor has it the main character is an INFJ. So if you want to kind of approach an INFJ from a fictional perspective, admittedly an unhealthy and alienated one, then this might just be the book to get. And it's available at the links below as well. You can also support me on Patreon, and that helps a lot, by the way. Anywhere from $3 a month. When the donations are aggregated, I get multiple supports. And it helps me survive, helps me keep the channel going, So consider that, and thank you so much to my supporters. Now, without further ado, let's talk about this concept of hybrid INFJ. I think it's a useful concept because, if you like, the test of its being useful is whether people can recognize themselves in it, and if it can contribute as a concept to an enrichment of their self-descriptions, and if it contributes to such a self-enrichment, whether it can actually help them navigate the world in a way that makes more sense to them, all right? And so thereby enrich their life experiences, can give more descriptions of them, which is very important for your mental well-being, among many other things. So a hybrid INFJ, as I conceive it, is quite simply an INFJ, a genuine INFJ. So we'll just take it for granted that in this video, we're not talking about people who are not INFJs, okay? We're not talking about people who are mistyped, who fancy themselves as INFJs, who are engaged in personality theory for vanity reasons, anything like that. We're talking about people who have every right to identify as INFJs, say, okay? So my claim is that in this category of genuine INFJs, we'll call them that, there are two subtypes. We will prefer using the word subcategories, I think, because subtype refers to other things, and I've proposed to divide subtypes of INFJs between the pure processing INFJ, the analytical INFJ, and the proactive INFJ, as you know if you watched the video on that topic. But here I'm talking about categories of INFJ in the manner in which they relate to the INFJ identity, right? Rather than the way in which they are on an everyday basis, and more analytical, more pure processing, and so on. A hybrid INFJ is then simply someone who cautiously identifies as INFJ as the most fitting type to describe their personality, but who at the same time does not feel 100% comfortable in that identity. That is to say that they are comfortable in the INFJ identity so long as they take a relatively liberal and porous understanding of that identity, where the elements of maybe other types, features of other types that they relate to more than the officially listed features of the INFJ, features of other types are allowed to exist. And of course, now you can see that the sun is playing with my nerves, so I will have to lower the blinds again. Okay, so if you like, the hybrid INFJ then is someone who identifies as an INFJ less because it perfectly encapsulates who they are, but because it is better as a description at encapsulating who they are than descriptions of other types. But that does not mean that there's no overlap in their, best self-descriptions between INFJ and some other type, or even possibly INFJ and more than one other type. So you could imagine that, INFJ is a circle. And if you're not a hybrid INFJ, you're a pure INFJ, let's say. And please, don't think that I'm making any Nazi analogy here. Pure is always a little bit of a loaded term, so we'll use it carefully. If you're a pure INFJ, so remember we're in the category of genuine INFJs in the first place, so that's taken for granted. The pure INFJ is the one who says, okay, the circle, I'm right in the middle. I identify with all of what's said, and I identify with traits of other types only insofar that these traits are known to belong to the INFJ as well. Because, it's certainly possible to identify fully as an INFJ, as a pure INFJ, and thereby to relate to traits that the INTJ also possesses because, and I lead, that the ENFJ possesses because same cognitive function stack in slightly different order. That's not, antithetical to identifying as a pure INFJ. The hybrid INFJ is different. The hybrid INFJ will tell you something like, if they're transparent or if they thought it through a lot, they will tell you something like, well, certainly INFJ is what I identify with the most, and there's various associations, whatever. But in this regard, for X trait, that trait, I have it, and apparently it's not meant to be inside the INFJ circle. And yet I have it. I want to be honest. I know I have it. And look, it's in the ISTP circle, or it's the INTP circle, or it's in the, ISTJ circle. Could be anything really. But these traits are traits that, if you like, are not meant to be in the overlap between INFJ and ISTP, for instance. They're meant to be properly inside the ISTP circle. And yet, if you were to look at the two circles, and all the various points like that kind of encapsulates the traits of ISTPs and of INFJs, the person will still say no, like by far, the narrative that's best suited to my identity is INFJ. So I am an INFJ. I'm comfortable with saying I'm an INFJ, but on the condition that I'm allowed a certain level of hybridity. That I'm not, or a fluidity. We could call them fluid INFJs, somewhat like someone could be gender fluid. I think there's going to be a lot of people, whether they know it or not, who are type fluid, who mostly identify as one type, such as INFJ, but not only. And, perhaps they really wish they did. It would simplify things to be identified as a pure INFJ, but they simply do not because they are looking at the facts, and that's what they take from the facts. So, of course, there's different possibilities of responding to a situation like this, which I believe is prevalent and which, like I said before, applies to me. I identify as a hybrid INFJ, to be quite honest. And, this has been implied in many of my videos when I just say INFJ is the best description for me. I never say INFJ corresponds to my inmost essence. It's exactly what I am in every possible sense, 100%, perfect match, and so on, because that's not what I believe. I don't think that's what experience teaches me about myself and about my type. So, if you like, the hybrid INFJ by their very nature, I think, and that's a way of linking to a video that I released recently on type essentialism and its enemies. I think the hybrid INFJ is by definition very much more likely to be anti-essentialist by type than they are to be essentialist. And note the interesting fact that their anti-essentialism is not actually going to be principally motivated by intellectual considerations, by arguments, by rhetoric, or any of these things. These will come into the picture, certainly, partly when it comes to articulating their own position. But the most fundamental reason and motivation for their rejecting essentialism is just their experience they don't think that they have an INFJ essence, because if they did, then how come they possess traits that are not meant to be part of the INFJ essence? Now, your strategy for the essentialist might be to say, let's update the INFJ essence and include, those traits that we thought were not part of the INFJ essence. But of course, that causes a further issue. Is if those traits are included in the INFJ essence, then how can they also be in the ISTP essence, to take just the example of the ISTP type? That creates a problem with individuating the concepts of INFJ and ISTP, and if you keep doing that and accommodating every demand of a hybrid INFJ wanting to remain in essentialism, you end up losing any distinction between INFJ and ISTP if you allow the process to last for a while. Another possibility is to say, okay, this trait that I have, that I identify with, but seems to fit more the ISTP type, even though all other traits seem more INFJ, is actually not an essential trait either of ISTP or of INFJ. Right? It's something that's just a theory of type is not meant to capture. Maybe until now we thought they could capture those traits, but they're not type specific. They're not personality specific. Now that's a more promising option, but because it has the promise of being more consistent, it can actually be made to work in theory anyway. The problem is that usually when you take this road, and this is something that I explored for myself a great deal, partly due to my experience of being a hybrid INFJ, is that, well, in practice, you will inevitably come across traits that you want to say are not type specific and personality specific, and yet are in themselves so informative about your personality that it would threaten to empty of meaning not so much the INFJ type or ICP, but the very idea of a theory of personality that does not incorporate traits that you can see are pretty obviously important to defining your personality, just loses its meaning and its import and its sense, So that's a really important theoretical question to ask, who, not at an intellectual level, but at an experiential level, something that comes first, the existential approach, identifies not as a pure INFJ, but as a hybrid. Someone for whom the description of the INFJ is the best among other descriptions of other types, but without encapsulating everything and allowing for certain traits described for other types being more suited to them. What type would you say you are? Are you, my dear genuine INFJ, are you more pure or are you more hybrid? Are you more like me or are you more not like me? Let me know in the comments and let's continue the conversation in the weeks to come. All right, don't forget my Patreon page, helps a lot. Take care.